will call the meeting to order, and at the rear of the room, we do have the Nebraska Open Meetings Act. Assisting us today, we do have Dan Nolte of the County Clerk's Office and Teresa Meyer of the City Clerk. And would you join me now in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and Mr. Clerk, will you call the roll of the county board?
Avery?
Yes, here.
Here. Shore?
Here.
Wilchin?
Here.
Amundsen?
Here.
5 commissioners are present.
And I would like to call this meeting to order for the City Council for a joint public hearing on the 2040 Lincoln-Lancaster County Comprehensive Plan on Monday, December 12th. And Teresa, would you please call the roll for the City Council?
Yes. John Camp.
Here.
Roy Christensen.
Present.
Carl Eskridge.
Here.
Trent Fellers.
Here.
Larry and Gaylor Baird.
Here.
Cindy Lamb.
Here.
Jane Raybold is absent. 6 members present of City Council.
I would like to nominate Roma Amundsen to chair this meeting for the joint bodies.
I'd second that motion.
And Teresa, do you want to call the roll for this, please,
Yes.
for the council?
Camp.
Yes.
Christensen.
Yes.
Eskridge.
Yes.
Fellers.
Yes.
Gaylor Baird.
Yes.
Lamb.
Yes.
Raybold is absent. Motion carried 6-0.
And you please call the roll.
Yep. Avery?
Yes.
Hutkins?
Yes.
Shore?
Yes.
Wilchin?
Yes.
Amundsen?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay. Well, this is a special concurrent meeting of the Lincoln City Council and the Lancaster County Board on the 2040 Lincoln-Lancaster County Comprehensive Plan update. The purpose of this hearing is to take testimony on the proposed comprehensive plan update. At the close of this hearing, separate action by both bodies will be taken. The printed agenda is available on the stand outside this room. The Open Meetings Act is posted at the back of the room. Following the administration of the oath by the county clerk, each person testifying should state their name and address and shall have 5 minutes to speak unless additional time is requested and granted. When you are finished testifying, please print your name and address on the sign-up sheet on the podium. While in session, the City Council and the County Board are engaged in the performance of the public's business, and a commensurate measure of decorum should at all times be maintained. It is therefore requested that during the course of these proceedings, those members of the public in attendance refrain from using any audible, mobile, portable, or wireless communication device, applauding, booing, or otherwise expressing support or opposition to a matter under discussion except through testimony. The City Council and the County Board are scheduled to close the hearing this afternoon, at which time separate action will be taken by the respective bodies. With that, I open the public hearing and will ask the City Clerk to call the item into record.
The item we're hearing today is the Comprehensive Plan Amendment 16005, amending the 2040 Lincoln-Lancaster County Comprehensive Plan to adopt the November 2016 draft of the L Plan 2040 update, the new Lincoln City Lancaster County 2040 Comprehensive Plan with amendments.
Good afternoon, and
I think I'll go ahead and swear you in.
apologize. Go ahead.
Do you solemnly swear from the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. First time doing one of the joint meetings. Paul Barnes with the Planning Department. Thank you all for getting together to look at the 2040 Comp Plan update. I'm going to go over most of the material in the chapters of this update document. We also have David Carey here, who Following my presentation, we'll get up and discuss the specifics of the transportation chapter, so that would be Chapter 10 of the comp plan. What I'd like to talk about here is some of the process that has been taken to get us to this point today. In looking at the comprehensive plan update that we're discussing, this is considered a minor update, which we do on the every 5th year of the major update. So the last major update was completed in 2011. That is the document that we have in place today. Halfway through that process, every 5 years, we look at doing an update. And so basically, this is a refresh of what we have before us. This process does affirm a lot of the assumptions in the plan having to do with growth policies, annexation, things like that. And that was done through the process as well during public hearings and public meetings, including the Planning Commission as an advisory role. Other things that are affirmed through this process include land use, and we do have some changes before you. Also with the growth tier and the priority growth tier map, we have some items to point out. And I'll also note that this process was coordinated with the Long-Range Transportation Plan. The Long-Range Transportation Plan is a document that uses the growth assumptions and the land use assumptions from the comprehensive plan to develop a prioritized strategy for investments in transportation for the community. This is a process that's required by the federal government every 5 years, and then allows us to receive federal funds and program priority projects for Lincoln and Lancaster County. The most recent plan for the LRTP would be 2011 as well. There's a lot of text on this slide, and it is also before you in a handout that should be titled Comprehensive Plan Update. I normally don't like to put a lot of text on the slide, but this is for emphasis to point out that there was an extensive public process put together for this update. And as you can see here, that began in August of 2015. And we had significant outreach to property owners, to developers. We had met with the Planning Commission as an advisory committee at least 18 times through this process and advertised those public hearings and those briefings. We put together an email group of over 1,800 emails and would send out blast messages to that group periodically throughout the process to keep those stakeholders informed as well. Earlier in the transportation planning process, there were 8 focus groups put together, bringing different interests to the table and having input on and guidance for the transportation plan. So you can see that there's quite an extensive list of outreach here. I'll also note that we do maintain a current website for the comprehensive plan update, where we do put all of our meeting materials and documents and planning reports on there. And we have sent that link to stakeholder groups and community groups as well. I'll also note that the Planning Commission did review the comprehensive plan on November 16th, and they did have a unanimous vote in support of the plan. I'm going to touch on just a couple of the assumptions that carry forward with the comprehensive plan update. We did maintain the horizon year of 2040, so we're looking at about a 24-year time frame here. And looking at the data that we've collected, that land area still does provide enough area for growth based on the projections that we have. But this also ties in with other master plan efforts that we have, such as the utility documents for water and wastewater improvements to happen over that period. So they both go together, and all of those plans maintain that 2040 horizon year. Population figures are on track with the projections that have been made. So Lincoln has had an annual growth rate of approximately 1.2% a year. The plan continues to assume that 90% of the county population will be in Lincoln, with the remaining percentage in villages and unincorporated areas. And we have maintained that 40% of the dwelling units constructed in Lincoln will be multifamily type. And looking at what's happened over the past 5 years, that's actually increased slightly. But we are confident that over that longer period, that should balance out to about 40%. We do carry forward this goal of 8,000 units of infill development. And as you've seen things happening downtown and in some of the older neighborhoods, such as the commercial area around University Place redeveloped, that's the kind of infill that's happening and is now reflected and continue to be reflected in the plan. So we're confident that 8,000 units of infill is an achievable goal over that period. Okay, I will note that in the fact sheet and packet that you've received, we did have summary sheets for each chapter that details in bullet points the changes that have been made throughout the document. So this slide does show some of those examples. Again, I don't want to go through all of those, but you should have those in your handout that was submitted in the packet. I guess just to touch on a couple of these things. In terms of the population growth, we did update those numbers throughout. There was some updated information for threatened and endangered species. Certain sub-area plans that have been adopted are now reflected in the plan as well. So really, we're just refreshing it with activity and things that have happened over the last 5 years. To get a little more specific in terms of changes, though, I'll point out a couple of things on this map. So this is the growth tier map for the city and county. And we had conversations with property owners and developers through a couple of different processes to talk to them about their interest in development of their land, mainly in the priority B and some in priority C areas of this map. So what I'd like to point out is an area in the Stevens Creek Basin. If you can see the arrow here, this has been an area of a lot of discussion. There's a lot of interest in growth here, and some of it's already happening. And so through this process, what we've done is propose a change from a priority C growth area to priority B growth area. And that's reflective of a couple of things. One would be the capital improvement program that was approved this year, and the intent of that plan to extend sewer service through this area, thus meaning that services could be provided and urban development could happen. But also, the landowners in this area are interested in that development, and through extension of those services, that could be accommodated. So this plan does have a connection and strong tie to the CIP and that process that was undertaken. The other area I'd like to point out is in the southwest area of Lincoln near the Southwest Village area, and that similarly is proposed to go from a priority C to a B as well, meaning that development for that area could be served by services within the next 10 years. And then lastly on this map, what you're looking at is what we call the future land use map. We had, through those similar processes, outreach to property owners and developers in the community to talk about any changes that were proposed to this. We did have a couple of changes. One I'll point out is near Northwest 48th and West Holdridge in what's called the Ring Neck development. It's been approved for a lot of industrial and commercial as well as some residential. That change is to focus more on residential. There hasn't been as high of a demand for the commercial and industrial. That is a change that's supported. And then out in the county near the Roca and Hickman jurisdictions, there's a proposed change within this area, just outside of both of those jurisdictions, to add additional low-density residential or acreage development on the map. And I think with that, I can answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Oh,
Paul, could you talk a little?
Councilwoman Jane
Oh,
Riegel.
thank you. Paul, could you talk a little bit about the change in the number of infill units you're projecting and why that's impactful to the 2040 plan?
Sure. So the plan proposes, at this point moving forward, 8,000 units of infill. we have models that project the number of units we'll need based on the population growth up to the year 2040. Some of that areas of development is going to happen on the edge of the city, but we're also seeing a lot of that residential growth within the existing city. So we have a lot of areas downtown that have seen additional residential units, 1,200 new units since 2012. We're also seeing some of the older commercial areas redevelop from commercial to a mix and include residential. We're also seeing some areas of existing apartment developments that are adding units within those developments as well. So based on the numbers that we have and the increase of units over the last 5 years, that trend shows us that we can accommodate 8,000 additional units. There's existing infrastructure in place. We have, the roads and the utilities versus, adding all of that onto the edge, which would further extend those services.
Thank you.
Councilman Camp?
Yes, Mr. Barnes, thank you. You, in just response to my colleague, you were talking about these projected 8,000 infill units. In the past several years, can you explain how all of the student housing has come in to impact that? Because that's quite a considerable number of units that have been added.
We do count the student housing units as a unit as well. And so that would be part of that downtown figure that I mentioned of 1,200 units.
Wouldn't that be most of it?
It's a bulk of it, yes. But we have seen some other developments that are market rate, and all types of housing would be encouraged under this plan.
Okay, and what about the planned the elimination of the 2 dormitories in the UNL campus that would flow into this?
Yeah, we do have ongoing conversations with the university on those topics, knowing that there's a goal to increase enrollment. We continue to talk to them about how those students will be accommodated in units. So I think that that's something that's an ongoing conversation. Also, I think that the private market has seen that that's a goal, and so they've provided these units off campus as well.
But have you taken into consideration the elimination of those 2 dormitories?
It's not specifically in this plan, but I think overall housing downtown would be encouraged, and we do acknowledge that enrollment growth with the students. Wouldn't
that eliminate, though, 1,000 or more of the 8,000 projected?
It sure could. I think that a lot of downtown, that's our most dense area of the community, and I think talking about density downtown is a good thing, and adding additional residential units that could accommodate growth in the university enrollment would be supported as well.
So you're not including those dormitories?
The dormitories that are being demolished?
Yes.
That's not specifically in here now.
Okay.
Councilman Christensen?
One of the unique things about Lincoln for a community of its size is we don't really have any suburbs. Now, concerns have been expressed to me by developers and realtors that by implementing this plan and not having plans to build as many new streets or widen streets that had been on the plan to be widened, that we will be promoting, as a perhaps unintended consequence, the formation of suburbs, especially in southeast Lincoln. Have we looked at this idea of suburbs and whether they're good or bad for the city in the future?
I think specific to the recommendations having to do with transportation, David Carey will get into those details.
Okay.
I guess what I'll just mention, though, is the continuing growth policies that are in the comprehensive plan, and that we, through the annexation policy, encourage contiguous growth, meaning land that's already adjacent to a city limits, is considered for annexation instead of more of a leapfrog type of development. Also, looking at the orderly growth based on urban services that are available, those being water and sewer lines, which we have very strong policies on in terms of following natural drainage basins. And so I think that in terms of growth overall embodied in this plan, that we do have longstanding policies that would continue that orderly growth concept.
Councilwoman Gaylord Baird.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Can you just speak a little bit about the way you develop your growth assumptions? I know you listed what they are, but can you talk a little bit about the factors that go into developing those numbers?
So I believe you're referring to this slide. A lot of this comes from data that is tracked. So we work with the Center for Urban Affairs out of Omaha, and we have a professional there who helps us with projections and growth. Excuse me. But we also look at the census estimates that are released every year. And so we compare the two between the projections and then what the census is releasing. And that's really where a lot of this data is coming from. We also have internal tracking for building permits and approved developments. As a community unit plan is approved, we enter that into our tracking system, and we can know basically on a month-to-month basis kind of what's available in inventory and things like that. So we do include a lot of data into the numbers that we show here, and really that's the basis of these figures.
Thank you.
Councilman Fellers?
So you're using data within building permits to talk about how growth is going to happen in the future. What about the market? Because really the market's going to dictate what comes forward in the future. So you say we've added 1,200 units of infill in the last 5 years? Is that your growth?
In the downtown.
Okay, in the downtown area, and you're saying that we might add, another 8,000 of infill? Is that throughout the community or just in the downtown area?
That would be community-wide within the existing city.
Okay, so you added 1,200 units downtown. How many more were in the greater community that would be infill?
That number I don't have available right now.
Okay.
What I can say is that the percentage increase in those numbers that we've seen over the past 5 years plot out a trend that would get us to 8,000 by 2040.
Okay. Do you use other economic factors that would limit the ability for us to maybe get to that 8,000?
I think that within a plan, you're always going to have some factors of, what happens in reality.
Sure.
And looking out 24 years, definitely there could be changes in that direction. But I think in terms of the plan policy and goal, we've been seeing these developments occur and would support that to continue.
Okay. I guess the point I'm trying to get to is I think we're in somewhat of an anomaly economic cycle in the last 5 years where interest rates have been incredibly low. So it's been easier for developers to go out and find money for projects at a pretty cost-effective rate. And I'm not saying that in the next few years we're going to see interest rates jump, but just in the last 3 months we've seen them grow up considerably from where they were. That might be a limitation on how we continue to grow the expansion of those units in the future, trying to hit that 8,000 infill number.
I think if I may add one other comment to that, we are planning a major update of the plan in 5 years.
Okay.
So every 5 years we do take a look at these figures. This isn't going to be the way it is until 2040, and we don't ever take a look at it. This, again, being a minor update, we will get into a lot more specific discussions on things like housing, and that'll be a major effort in 5 years.
It's also what the market bears, right? Because infill may not be what the market wants. It might be, further development on the east and south side of the town. That might be what they want.
I think that's an accurate statement. I think that we have some of those infill projects approved and under development now, and it'll be interesting to see how those do over the next 5 years.
Thank you.
Councilman Camp?
Yes, kind of a interesting follow-up, and that is all of the construction of homes that have occurred outside the city limits, and some of that's due to impact fees and other market factors, the cost of land in the city. How did you factor that into your predictions or your forecasts?
Well, we do track dwelling units that are constructed outside of the city, and again, that's in our internal tracking system. We come up with the figure of 90% population in Lincoln and the remaining outside of that city limits based on those figures. We know that there's a growth trend and an interest in low-density developments or acreage developments. And so we did an inventory on what's available to be built and also the trend of how quickly are those being built. And so as part of that discussion, you see that we've added some of that low-density area in the Hickman and Roca vicinity.
Commissioner Avery?
They didn't give me a mic.
We're sharing.
Following up on some of the comments that have been made already about how you arrive at your numbers, it is very likely that interest rates will rise. The Federal Reserve Board has made it clear that they intend to at least have an increase this December, and we anticipate that next year there will be more. Surely that will have an impact on some of the numbers that you are projecting. I understand that it's not easy to project, to tell us what's going to happen in 10 years, or certainly not 24 years. But you had to have had some way of including in your projections anticipated increases in interest rates. We have a new administration about to take office next month. We don't know what the impact will be from that administration. It could be good, could be cataclysmic. I mean, I'm reading some material that suggests that we're facing a very, very rocky road economically in the next 4 years. So I guess you're asking us to take these numbers that you're projecting as best estimates, but several people here have already identified some areas where you don't seem to be taking into account important information. Do you have any response to that?
I would say I think that we've had some pretty consistent tracking methods that show over time in Lincoln we've had consistent growth, and we can continue to count on that. The figure of 1.2% growth annually has been in place for decades. It wavers slightly, but over time it's really been pretty stable. I think that the plan before you includes the best data that we have, and yes, there's a good point about what's coming in the future, and I think that it's going to be very interesting and imperative that we watch that and monitor that. Like you said, nobody knows how that could be impacted, and maybe it's going to be good economic times, maybe it's going to be not so good, but I think that that's something that we do need to monitor and watch in moving forward.
And that would be included in your 5-year update?
Absolutely. Any new data that we will have by the next 5 years would influence the plan at that point. We did see the number of residential building permits go down significantly during the recession, and we tracked that and watched that as well. So there are going to be ups and downs over time, but what we've presented to you is the data that we've been tracking up to this point. So it is a projection.
I don't want to appear insensitive to the difficulty of your job, because I know it must be extremely difficult. I have confidence in the planning department and the process, and I think that we all ought to be pleased with the process, even if we don't like the product.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wilton?
Yeah, just to follow up on Commissioner Avery, Paul, and I'm going to, I guess, seek confirmation about what I assume, which is the major reevaluation of the comp plan is based off of the decennial census every 10 years. Is that why it's done and the year ending in 1? Is that, because I know that what happens is after every census you have the release of a housing characteristics. Basically, it's the actual characteristics for all housing in every political subdivision. And then every year since probably 2001, there've been annual updates with the housing population surveys as well as the American Community Survey. The release is now annual. And so I'm assuming that that's in line with what the city of Lincoln and Lancaster County does.
Right, we do rely on that census data, and so timing of that and its release is impacted and then included in the plan. So yes, we do watch the timing of that release and then use that data in our recommendations.
Councilwoman Lamb?
Thank you. So earlier in your presentation, and I'm kind of moving away where everyone else is at, but basically you talked about the LRTP is coordinated with the comp plan, and I just wondered if there's any other plans or documents that are incorporated by reference into this comp plan other than the LRTP.
Yes, there are.
Okay, and so do they get separate review by these boards, or?
Yes. One example that I would note would be the South Haymarket Neighborhood Plan, which was a sub-area study and a plan that was adopted by reference a year ago.
Can you tell me any others?
Well, the utility master plans for water, wastewater, watershed, all of those are embodied in this plan as well. Like I said,
Go ahead.
the horizon year for those master plans, since they tie to growth and development of the community, those are tied to the 2040 year as well. So in 5 years, if we're looking at a different time horizon, we'll probably be looking at updating those master plans as well.
So would I find reference in the summaries that you've given me, would I find reference where those are incorporated in the appropriate chapters?
If they were new and added with this update, then yes. Otherwise, there is a section that we can provide you that does talk about those plans.
Okay, and if they were new or added since the last major
Correct.
revisions? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Short?
Knowing that we'll be probably looking at this more in depth in 5 years, were any assumptions made at this point with regards to the South Beltway, knowing that we're looking at 2040, and how that might alter development in the southern part of the county?
So we do acknowledge that the South Beltway is there, and throughout the LRTP as well, note that that's funded. In terms of your question, are you asking about land use and growth?
Possible commercial developments at intersections adjoining, multifamily residential?
So, as I said before, we do have strong growth policies embodied in the plan for contiguous growth that's adjacent to the city limits. We also want to grow and develop in areas that we can provide gravity flow sewer to, and also water service. And a lot of that's based on the drainage basins in the natural landscape. And so a lot of that feeds into this map that you see on the screen, which is the growth tier priority map. There is an area adjacent to the South Beltway, more on the westerly side, that's in what we call growth tier 1 priority C. And that would be an area possibly up to the year 2040 that could be developed, that could be annexed and contiguous to the city, that could be serviced by water and sewer. If we look further to the east and outside of that, we get into another drainage basin that is a much larger project, and a multi-million-dollar investment would be needed to open that land up for development. We then start talking about capacity of the existing treatment plants and what kind of investments would be needed to those. So yes, there is some growth potential near the South Beltway there, kind of in the further out years. I think in the major update in 5 years, we could be having a lot more of those discussions in terms of, okay, what is the next basin for growth? Where do we want to look to next? And how do we make that happen?
Thank you.
Yes, sorry
Councilman
to have so many
Camp?
questions, but when you talk about the South Beltway, that's happening. People have been anticipating that for 30 years, and it's just going to be a natural area for growth. And if you waited 5 years, you know, it's gonna be under construction. And I guess I would see that to be a little bit late when you talk about the millions of dollars of investment that's needed on various fronts to support that growth.
I apologize if I misspoke, but we do know that that South Beltway is happening. That's in the plan and it's been there. Just to clarify, I guess what I'm saying is that under the utility master plans and the plan document that we have from 5 years ago, we have put into place growth scenarios that would follow all of those growth policies based on the utilities and also based on the growth projections that would get to a portion of the South Beltway. And that is reflected in this plan and is acknowledged and within those policies as well.
What's acknowledged mean?
We show that there's some growth that could happen adjacent to the South Beltway. But those growth policies that have been in the plan for quite some time show how that needs to be done orderly and efficiently. And like I said, a lot of that's following that drainage basin for the gravity flow sewer. And based on that natural topography and landscape, that's a really big driving force of that growth pattern.
You keep talking in terms of speculative could, and we acknowledge, it seems like it will happen. One of our colleagues here was asking about the market forces, and I hate to think you're socially engineering here.
You solemnly swear affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. David Carey with the Planning Department. I'd like to pick up on that question, John. I think one of the main points to keep in mind here, two things. One is we will be updating the plan in 5 years, which is the time frame of when the South Beltway will just be getting under construction. We don't expect that to be completed until about 2025. That will be a time when more major changes potentially will be proposed and adopted into this plan. And I think that topic will be addressed. I think that's going to be the right timing of that discussion. The other point to be made here is that if we're going to be doing something dramatically different than what this growth plan shows in the current plan and the plan that's before you for consideration, we are not suggesting, nor do we think would be realistic to suggest that we would grow any faster than what we are projecting because of the South Beltway. The South Beltway will provide us an opportunity to make traffic flow on Highway 2 better and safer by getting the trucks off. And that's a fact, and that's why we're very much in support of the plan to build that facility. The reality, though, is that if we really moved much more quickly towards the South Beltway as far as growth is concerned, there are other areas of the city that would see less growth, most likely. So I think that would be part of that discussion in probably actually more like 4 years, and we really get into those details and those topics. So I think that's the consideration that we've taken into account with this update. This minor update. It does include the South Beltway, as Paul said. It does include actual assumptions of growth happening down to the South Beltway in the planning period. But it does not assume that there's going to be more growth than what has been assumed down there. And if that is going to be part of the discussion, we should discuss that in the major update. Plus, part of that discussion would be consideration of where the growth, that additional growth would not happen throughout the community.
Okay, are there any further questions of the gentleman? Okay. You did have a presentation also?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Thank you very much. What I wanted to, and realizing that there's a lot of interest and emphasis on the transportation chapter, which is chapter 10 of the comprehensive plan. We wanted to get the other chapters addressed first before we got to transportation. One thing we can all agree on is that transportation is very important, and there are a lot of needs out there to try to address. So it is important to have that discussion. It's important to spend some time on this. What I would like to just kind of point out, and this is more for clarity, both for the audience as well as for all of us, in that what we're talking about is, for transportation, is the transportation chapter, chapter 10 of the full comprehensive plan is what's before us today. There is the long-range transportation plan, and I want to just kind of walk through this real quick here about what the difference is here. The transportation plan shows up in both of these documents, and it should, and we want it to, because it's makes sense that our local comprehensive plan has a transportation strategy in it that reflects also our long-range transportation plan, which is the LRTP. That is a document that we historically have been creating. It is not a new document, but it is approved through a different process, which is the Officials Committee for the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is a required process as part of the federal process to qualify for and obtain federal transportation dollars for our projects and our programs. So it's very important for us to fulfill those requirements. We want those plans to be consistent with each other. And that is something, reason why we do these at the same time is that they are basically the same plan. There's a little bit more detail in the LRTP because of a lot more emphasis on financial constraint as well as just background information. But the content and the proposals and the projects are the same. I just want to be clear about that. The other thing I would point out there is that what we are scheduled for is to have that officials committee, which is represented by the chair and vice chair of both the county board and the city council, that body will be meeting next Tuesday for the purpose of acting on the LRTP. So that's just for some background, just to make sure that we're clear about what we're working on today, as well as what the relationship is between the LRTP and the Comprehensive Plan Chapter 10 for transportation. Paul mentioned the significant process that we've undertaken to get to this point, both for the Comprehensive Plan and for the LRTP. And so I just kind of want to highlight some of those things that we did start working on the transportation piece back in September of 2015 when we hired a consultant, FHU, who has done a very good job, a great job for us through this process and has helped us get to the plan proposal that we have today and then next Tuesday for the LRTP. We did use the Planning Commission as that main public body throughout. We had, I think it was at least 18 different briefings of that body, all meetings of which were public in nature. And they did provide us guidance throughout the process. The Planning Commission has now acted on the comprehensive plan as well as the LRTP. They've acted on November 16th and approved and brought it forward to both of your bodies for your action. We had 3 different specific public meetings, one in February of 2016, one in May, and one in September, to review both the comprehensive plan as well as the transportation topic in unison. We had 2 online surveys to provide opportunity for comment and input with over 1,000 responses. We felt like that was compared to previous process for the comprehensive plan and the LRTP, that was a great way to get interaction with the community, much more than we would normally get. So we felt good about that. We used focus groups in this process, 8 different focus groups, to invite for different perspectives on what the needs are for transportation and to identify early on. These meetings happened back in January. They were very helpful for us to kind of lay the groundwork for what the needs are and what the different perspectives are out there. And that information was used very much so as far as establishing the new plan for transportation. We also had multiple different meetings of our MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, groups, which was our technical committee, which is a staff level review of this information, as well as the officials committee, as I spoke of earlier. We provided over a dozen presentations to various groups on an as requested basis. That's always good for us to get out into the community and talk about this topic and try to get feedback that way, and we did do that. Whenever we did send out information, whether it be about our public meetings or draft plans being put out on the website and coming up for action for public hearing, that was sent out to over 1,800 individual emails. It's important for us to get the word out as much as possible. If nothing else, we are a lot about process, and we want to make sure that people understand and have an opportunity to participate in our process, and that was a big way to do that. That is the email list that we use for our ongoing agenda items for the Planning Commission, by the way. Again, just to note that we did have a briefing of both the City Council and the County Board in September, and then again, the County Board again in November. And that gets us to this point in time. So we feel good about the process that we've taken to this point. We feel like the information has been considered strongly, both on a staff level and by the community as well. A little bit of information about the transportation content itself. It is that same 24-year planning horizon to 2040. So the comprehensive plan looks out to 2040. Within that, the transportation outlook looks out to 2040 as well. This has to be a financially constrained plan on the long-range transportation side of things, and that's what we have done. And we feel that that is good planning, by the way, that we should do that. It's kind of like balancing your checkbook every month. You really shouldn't be saying you're going to do more than what you can financially afford, and that's what the plan is that's before you, that we have constraints. There are many more needs that we acknowledge and want to try to get to, but we only have so much funding to get to the most critical parts of that, and we feel like we put together a package that meets that most critical need. One thing to keep in mind, and this is very important on the transportation side, is that as part of a financially constrained plan, we have to acknowledge that there is a factor of inflation for our projects and our programs. I wish this wasn't part of it, because it would make our decision-making a lot easier, I think. But the fact is that we've been experiencing 5% inflation rate for our transportation projects for the last number of years, and that is the assumption that's built into this plan. The growth in revenues that we have also identified in this plan grow on an average about 2.5%. So about half the rate of growth of the inflation. And really what that means is if we had a $10 million project today, by 2030 that project is going to cost $20 million, and by 2040 it's going to cost $32 million. So when you start to move out beyond the first 5 or so years of the future, you really have an impact on the value of your dollar from today out to the future. So it's something that really impacts the ability for us to get more projects done. We would love to get more projects done, but that is a real constraint that we have, and we have to do that to make sure that we're accounting for that. It's possible, going back to market trends, it's possible that it won't be that big and it won't be as bad as that, and that'd be fine by me, because that means we'll get more done and we can afford more to get done. But that is what the assumption is in the plan. There's been a lot of discussion about the kind of the distribution of revenues for the major programs, and I just share with you one slide here just to point out, and I have a handout for this as well that I want to hand out to everybody, just so that you have this. So this is just to kind of hopefully provide some clarity on some of the topics of discussion more recently on this proposed plan. What this chart shows us is that when we compare the 2011 transportation plan to the 2016 plan, and breaking it down to the major programs, both plans were consistent in breaking it down to roads and transit and trails. These are the numbers of the assumptions in the plan as far as the breakdown of the amount of dollars of investment in transportation. And what we see is that generally speaking, clearly roads is the primary. It is the primary effort, and it's going to continue to be the primary effort here in Lincoln, Nebraska. But there are other needs out there, including transit and trails. And so what the breakdown shows us is that we are very, very close to exactly what the existing plan shows for the level of investment. And in fact, we see a slight dip in the transit investment going towards roads between 2011 and now 2016. So this is really just to be clear about what the current plan that is adopted says compared to the proposed plan. Some basic highlights of the new plan, just to show, is that the use of technology is a growing part of the transportation discussion. We have an increased amount of investment proposed in this plan, and we feel like that is a very good use of our dollars, a very high bang for your buck, to able to get some benefit out of the use of technology for the flow of traffic moving forward. That is a new emphasis that we feel very good about, because it's we can get a lot of benefit out of it for less investment overall, so that we can get other projects done with some of those savings. The number one priority that came out of our process for all that input that we received is to maintain what we have, both for maintenance in general, as well as for rehabilitations of our streets especially. And we took that to heart as far as how this plan is put together, that we have also a focus on maintenance and rehabilitation. When you look at the breakdown of the numbers, we feel like that is a smart way to establish the future condition of your road program, as well as trails, but mainly on the road side of that equation. We also heard very loud and clear that we want a balanced program for transportation. So it's not just about maintenance and rehab, it's not just about building new streets, it's not just about transit, and it's not just about trails. It's a balance between those. And we feel like we have struck that balance in the proposed plan. Something to be clear about, and this is another image that I'd like to share with you. This is where we get into, this is from page 10.61 in the chapter 10 of the comprehensive plan. This map shows kind of the capital improvements to the road program. Want to highlight that. What you see in blue are what are considered committed projects. And it's important just to point this out for everybody, just because basically the first 7 years of our proposed plan are pretty much tied down to the investments that we're already saying that we're either doing already or about to do with our 6-year CIP especially. And this includes Yankee Hill Road, Pine Lake Road, West A Street, 14th Warlick and O'Chaney, North 10th Street Bridge over Salt Creek, the West Beltway interchanges along Highway 77, which is a state project, as well as the South Beltway, which is a funded project both from the state as well as through the city of Lincoln, as well as various developer commitments that we have to try to meet the demands of the developer community. It's important just to realize that the first 7 years or so are really tied down to those projects on the capital roadway improvement side. That is what we can get to, and we've already voiced commitments to those projects. The last thing I will leave you with as far as a highlight of the urban transportation program is the combination of use of technology as well as specific corridor improvements for intersections. To be clear, there's still going to be investment in some of these major corridors that we're now saying that we're not going to start with the assumption that we're widening those streets. We're thinking of North 84th Street, Highway 2, O Street, Cornhusker Highway. And just to be clear again, that Highway 2, in addition to level of effort for use of technology to shift the traffic flow to improve through these corridors, there's also a $20 million worth of projects identified in the plan for specifically Highway 2. And that would be those intersection improvements, addition of turn lanes, extending the turn lanes, improvements to the signals themselves. So Highway 2 has that $20 million investment identified. North 84th Street has $4 million. O Street over $18 million, and Cornhusker Highway, $4.5 million. So this is that question has come up as we've been talking about this, and I want to be clear that that doesn't mean we're not investing physically into those corridors. It means that we're not doing as much investment because of the sheer cost of pure widening, with not as much benefit coming back by doing those widenings. We do have a rural roads program as part of this. Don't want to forget about that. It is a very hot topic right now as far as the needs for the rural system. Similarly to the urban system, there are a lot of needs out there that, quite honestly, county engineer is having trouble keeping up with. There's a lot of bridge constraints there as well, as far as the quality of our bridges and the need to get to those improvements. We had a very close coordination with the county engineer's office through this process, so we do have a rural program, and it really is focused on those priority paving projects as well as maintaining what we have out there. So I think a lot of us have been part of or heard a lot of those discussions recently. There's a lot of work to be done there as well on the rural side. I will focus one more map on, this is the map for the trails program. Very small piece of the overall pie of the investment in transportation as proposed in the plan, as well as in the current plan, 1.5% of the overall number. Just pointing out that the way we put this together is that we're really trying to get those edge extensions of trails for the trails network in those growing areas. That's really the focus on the strategy, as well as to put some investment into maintaining the trails program. We can get to a lot of them, but not all of the trail needs out to 2040. But we feel confident that this is the type of strategy that will at least get in those areas that are going to mature as neighborhoods to get those trail systems extended and built out there. One last significant piece, obviously, is the transit program. That is basically what we're reflecting in the plan is what has been adopted as part of the new transit development plan that has just come through the approval process as well as what has been adopted in the budget, this past 2-year budget for StarTran. And really what that reflects is getting that phase 1 of the TDP out there and implemented, which is currently happening right now. But not really getting much further beyond that. There are other phases. I think there's 5 phases actually in the TDP that we can't get to those needs as well. So what we're saying though is that the level of investment is basically what we're already doing moving forward to 2040. So it's not an increased investment into the transit system. There is, I've alluded to it now, but there is an illustrative plan in this, which is basically all the projects for roads and transit and trails that we can't get to and can't afford. There are pages and pages in this new document that list out those projects. We would love to get to many more of those projects than what we can get to. We've identified the highest and most critical needs in those different areas of the transportation system. And again, it gets back to being as smart as possible with taxpayer dollars and revenues that we have, and trying to get those projects done that we feel are the most needed moving forward. I think I'll end there. I ask any questions.
Councilman Christensen?
Yep.
Over the last maybe 10 years, I've seen indications that the classification of our streets, the roads in our city, have the percentage of those streets classified as in poor condition has increased over the last 10 years. And then we see this comparison of investments since, you know, the last time this LRTP was done, and we're saying we're going to keep maintain the same mix. Well, it seems at the first blush that mix has resulted in poorer road conditions. So why do we want to do it the same way if we've been not getting the best results? You know, when I go out in the community and people complain to me, because mostly people complain to elected officials, and they complain a lot about our streets and how it's getting worse. So why are we keeping the same prioritization of allocation of funds if we are already losing ground?
Yeah, very good question. And I think there's some engineers in the audience that have picked up some of those complaints as well. Part of the answer just again to be clear, part of that is that we are faced with increasing costs faster than what our revenues can keep up with. And so I would point to that as being one of the main culprits of being even more challenged today than 10 years ago to keep up with the needs that are out there. So I would start with that. I think the rest of the answer to that is that there are needs other than the road system, even though the road system is the largest and should be the largest and should continue to be the largest portion of the budget. That is and going to be the biggest demand for our infrastructure for transportation. But there are other needs out there. And so there is, in a very small scale, a trails program that we're very much lauded for. And it is one of those quality of life and attractiveness features of our community that really helps with things like economic development and retaining and attracting people to live here. On that point, those funds are not available to be moved around. So that's one thing. I did look into that recently to make sure that we knew all the history there on that. So there's not really an ability to move the funding amounts around. When we look at the transit program, which is about 18.5% of the total program, that is there is more investment there compared to the trails. And when we look at the opportunity to possibly move some of those funding sources around, we are quickly established with a concern with if we start to move too much money away from transit, we start to lose the ability to provide an adequate or functional transit system for our community. In addition to the fact that a full 50% of that funding is not movable, that is either federal funds, state funds, or revenue created by the transit system itself through fares and contract services with UNL, as well as the fact that we match those federal funds with local dollars. And if you start to move monies around in any significant fashion, you really start to gut the transit system. And we have consistently over time, as well as in this new plan, said that a transit system is important to this community, largely because we're dealing with some of the most vulnerable members of our population that can't afford a vehicle or are unable to use a vehicle on their own. All that goes into that answer to your question, and I know it's not an easy question to answer. It's not an easy topic to get into, but I think that is the real focus of where we've been for this proposed new plan.
Thank you.
Commissioner Avery, and then Councilman Camp.
Now I have a microphone this time. I want to know to what extent your planning took into account changing demographics. I'm thinking in particular about millennials. What we know about millennials, I have one, and I know less and less about millennials the more I interact with him. But what we think we know anyway is that they're different from we baby boomers. That they value different things. They look at the world differently. Not just on, say, environmental issues, which is a big, big difference from their parents for the most part. It suggests to me that if you take into account these changing demographics, that you might find that you have too little in the trails, too little in transit, and maybe too much in the traditional way we spend our traffic money or our roads money or whatever, transportation money. They're bikers, and they're going to dominate this country in a few years. And they want and demand that we give them, we provide for them, safe, extensive network of bike trails. Did you try to figure that into your calculations at all?
I try to answer that as a forgotten Generation X person. Good luck, right? The answer is yes, but I have to explain more of kind of how we landed on the findings in the proposed plan. 5 years ago, when we did the major update of the plan, there was an awful lot of research done on changing demographics. That's when we really started to get into what it means to have the baby boomer generation enter retirement age and what impact that has on transportation in addition to land use and demand for services. At the same time, we looked at the millennial generation, which is effectively the children of the baby boomers. And there's a lot of information out there about their desires and their demands and what that they expect out of day-to-day living and what a community can provide them. And a lot of that, for both generations, it goes into thinking about what type of community we want to have in the future to be attractive and to continue to grow and to be able to be a vibrant area for all generations, but especially for the younger generation, because they're the ones that are going to move us forward for the long period of time. So we've had a lot of discussions back then, and going into this update, we continued to have those conversations about those different generations. The tricky part of that is that we don't want to overstate what impact that younger generation will have, and that is a lot of the reason why this plan is pretty similar to what the current plan has in it, mainly because we have constraints on our finances that we can't, similar to going from transit or trails to roads, going the other way is just as difficult. It's not like you can take away from one pot and put it in the other one and say there's not going to be any impact over there. So we don't want to overstate what that younger generation is going to do. We do update this plan every 5 years. By the way, and Paul alluded to this, if there's going to be a major shift that we didn't expect and it's happening in real time, we would be proactive and update the plan at that time as well. So we don't want to lock into just the 5 years, but I think the every 5 years does give us an opportunity to look at those trends more and then say, okay, are we reflecting reality as best as possible? So we do want this balanced program, and we also want to try to fund the most critical needs, and that's really where we're landing on this plan.
But if I'm a millennial, I would say, no, you're not. You're landing on the plan where I'm not going to be.
It's possible. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We feel like but what we're also saying is that we've got some of those pieces in the plan that speak to that demand. And so we feel like we've got that base covered, so to speak, and then we're going to keep watching what's happening as far as what those demands are. That's part of what we do.
I'm going to stop here. Let me say, planning is hard. I understand that.
Okay. Councilman Camp and then Councilwoman
Thank you.
Gaylord Baird.
Two general questions. Number one, in your allocation of resources, you have other bike/pedestrian and TDM at 33.5 million, but then you simplify later funding by program, and I don't see it in there. I just see the trails, but where are the bike lanes and so forth? Is that in?
That 33 million that you identified, that is assumed in the roads program. So it's not, we kind of have the trails, transit, roads as the basic, but then within there, each of those, there's quite a few different things going on. But within the roads program, there is that on-street and pedestrian, on-street bicycle and pedestrian effort. But I would say that 33 million is the vast majority of that is the ongoing sidewalk maintenance program, which is attempting to keep it at the $1 million per year of the sidewalk maintenance program.
Okay. And then second question is, let's talk about funding, where the resources come from. There's a proposal in here to increase every 5 years wheel tax of $5, and we already have a substantial amount, and I'm sure our county colleagues are willing to do something in the county to help us. Well, got a zero on that one. So we're talking about increasing wheel taxes, but we got the transit, we got the bike trails that we haven't, if anything, we've decreased transit fare box collections and so forth. What are you assuming is going to happen to those and to bike trail funding sources for these millennials, from these millennials?
Good question. On the trail side, there is language in the current plan, and we're carrying it forward in this new plan of a bicycle registration fee. It won't equate to a ton of money, but it's something. And it's something that we haven't really pushed forward, but I think it's something that I've heard it enough that I think it's something that we probably need to really move on now. And quite honestly, in the conversations with the biking community, I think that there's a general feeling of that's fine, that's a good thing. So that's something. Again, not going to generate a ton of money, but it's something, and it provides some level of effort there.
So out of 33 million, how much, or well, 67 million, how much would that generate?
I don't know what the number would be right now. It depends on how it's set up, but it probably would be set up when just new purchase of new bicycles occur within the city limits maybe, and then it would be an added fee to that. But there's different ways to do it. I would have to look at that more closely, but that's something that has been in the plan and just hasn't been implemented, but I think that's something that we should look at.
Okay.
On the transit side, I would say that actually, and Mike Davis is here to talk specifically about this if we want to go further into this, but the level of revenue that we receive from what's considered a bundle of things like fare revenue, advertising, and then also contract services, and in particular that means UNL, that amount of revenue actually has gone up fairly significantly in recent years, mainly because of the UNL contracts.
But if you take that out, the fare box is 8% of the cost of the routes. Been that consistently,
Yeah, I
if
think
not
it's
even going up.
in that range, but I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but, I mean, that is about where we're at with that. So what we're saying is that we're showing increases in those revenues, and the fastest increase actually is being shown for those types of local generated revenues in the proposed plan.
From the Big Red Express and UNL, the fare box is not up.
Yeah, and it's looked at kind of as
gets
a
down.
bundle, but I would assume that the main driver of that increase will be those contract services.
Okay, Councilwoman Gaylord Baird and then Councilman Fellers.
Thanks, David. This is a helpful chart because it shows obviously the separation. If you think about these as sort of buckets of revenues that can't really cross lines very easily. And when we hear about potential changes and things that aren't included in the plan, can you help us understand what would have to happen in order to modify, particularly with regard to roads? Some of the widening that you mentioned that has a high price tag. In order to add a widening project, what would that do to the current plan that involves our roads funding, which I understand is 41% is being devoted to maintenance based on the public input that you got. We've heard about needing to take care of the existing street network from the public. What would we have to do to add a widening project, for instance? What kind of trade-off would we be looking at?
Yeah, the cost of widening projects, they're expensive. I think a number that we're using right now is about $11 million per mile. And that is That's reality. I mean, you know, it's not like we can pretend that that doesn't exist. If we're going to add more widening effort to the system or to the proposed plan, I think it would have to come from two main areas. Either we're taking away from another road program, because sometimes it's more easily obtainable to try to go from one program to another within the road world. And I'm not saying that that's what we should do. I'm saying that that was one way to do it. And there probably is even some constraints on that because some of the revenues that we get, our TSD is a good example, that really can only be used for those train crossing and safety improvement projects that involve that type of an issue. It's not easy to just transfer even within roads, but that would be one way to do it. But again, you'd be taking away from something else that's just as needed, I would say. Another way would be to find more revenue somewhere, which is not an easy discussion to have, but that would be another way to try to attack that. I don't really have any other ideas besides those to be able to pull that off.
What about also as we look to the future and as we look to expanding out, how does the cost of widening compare to the cost of just building wider roads to begin with? Like planning for them to be used more heavily in the future?
I might have Randy come up to get into the specifics of what the difference in cost is. They're very expensive regardless. I mean, it's not, that's part of the challenge with this plan has been that, you know, we know that those costs are out there, and if we're going to do those projects, we have to, they add up very quickly. I don't know, did you want Randy to
Also curious if you have any comment on cost containment strategies. I mean, you said
Yeah.
these are the costs we face, but is there anything we can do to try and contain them from your experience?
Yeah, sorry, I guess I would throw that in as a number 3 answer to that question, is try to do our best to contain costs. I think as we've talked about that, the idea of having increased investment at a consistent basis, in other words, more than just 2 or 3 years worth of additional projects on the road system, if there was a sustained level of increased investment, that is part of the way to address some of that inflationary cost, because you can attract more project construction teams to come not only be here in Lincoln, but to stay here, or to be built from within Lincoln, and so that they have that level of consistency and guarantee that there's going to be work there. And so the bidding on regular project proposals will probably become more competitive in that sense. I don't think there's a guarantee in that, but that's one thing that could happen that would help for that cost control. I think we already do some of this, and Public Works staff could speak to this better than I could, but I think bundling projects as much as possible so that they're a little bit larger instead of, you know, really divvying up projects. I'm thinking of rehabilitation programs and things like that, so that there's enough meat on the bone for people to competitively bid on. I think that's part of it too. I'm not an expert in that area, but those are some of the topics that we've addressed or tried to address. But I think all those things need to be considered if we're going to try to control costs.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilman Fellers and then Councilwoman Lamb.
I heard some talk about millennials, so I just wanted to address that once because it's something I kind of experienced a little bit. So are we seeing growth with millennials in public transportation locally? Are we seeing that growth within the StarTran system in the data that we're getting for ridership?
I will ask, I believe Mike's here. He's going to know a lot more about the actual ridership data than I will.
Okay.
But as far as growth in ridership, we have seen increasing over the last 5 years or so, an increase in ridership overall.
Okay, so if we're seeing increase in growth in ridership, is it enough to justify a change in the level of service that we have, considering we have already just altered the routes?
I guess maybe to be clear on what is being proposed, we're not suggesting an increase in the amount of service being put out there.
Okay, so I'm just looking for the cause and effect, because what I hear in my age group is for the years of maybe 20 to 30, and maybe a little bit beyond there, there's some desire to live closer to downtown and walk. But then once you get beyond those age groups, like I am now in 36 with 2 kids, it's still just a kid. I'm seeing more of those folks move outside of the downtown area and go towards more traditional routes, like, you know, minivan and or SUV and hauling those kids. Yeah, you're with me. So what I think is we have national trends that are saying, hey, millennials want to see more public transportation, and they do. But I think that's somewhat of a limited time period where they do it because their lives changed over time. So once they get into their 30s, they are maybe living in a larger house, maybe away a little bit further from work, and their life changes so that they have to pick a kid up at school or daycare or wherever. So I think where we want to see some of those national trends up those public transportation numbers, and that's really good. As those millennials grow and mature, they are going back into more traditional modes of transportation, like I am. I live downtown in a small 1-bedroom apartment, and then about 8 years ago, our life changed pretty dramatically, where we had a kid and we couldn't stay in that place anymore. So I think when we talk about millennials and we talk about what they're desiring, we have to also look at how their life might change over the course of time, and make decisions on transit based on data and ridership, but not on what a polling result may say for what a millennial might look at, because their lives are going to change. We also had the Chamber's Young Professionals Group come and talk to the City Council. And if we remember, when we asked what people were looking for, there was a significant number of people in that group that said that they wanted South Beltway. And they wanted South Beltway because the time that they spend in a car is incredibly important, because the less time they spend in a car, the more time they get to spend at home with those kids, and not having them seatbelted in the back seat. So that was more of a statement than a question, but we're kind of in a similar age group, so I think you understand kind of the changing demographics.
And maybe just to comment on that a little bit further, in that, you know, just also, again, to be clear on what this plan is proposing, what it's not proposing, is, for example, we developed an updated traffic model, which we do every time we do this, so that it gives us good information based on our growth plans and our land use. We do not assume in that traffic model any increase in the amount of bikers or walkers or transit users. It's basically a status quo model. And then we talk about, outside of the model, we talk about, you know, what policies might be needed to affect that. But again, what's being proposed here is moving forward with the kind of the limited amount we can afford to provide for the existing service and existing levels of effort. And we're not proposing those, you know, an increase. And the other way we look at, as far as the progression of generations, I think it's always been this way, but I think the reality is that we know that when you're younger and don't have kids, you're much more flexible in your day-to-day activity, and you have other options besides being on, you know, in a more of a suburban setting, where you can get to your daycare and school more easily. So I think that's reflected in this proposed plan, which is a balanced plan to really invest as much as we can in all the different modes to a reasonable level. So that's really been our focus. But again, we're not assuming that there's going to be this major influx of activity on those other modes just because we think it's going to happen.
So one more question. How does this plan take into account possible disruptive technology like driverless cars, which are knocking on the door and could be here within the next 5 years?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion about what that level of technology development will have on our transportation system. We do not have an assumption in this plan that says certain percentage of vehicles are going to be that in 5 years or 10 years. We are watching very closely what that development of technology is telling us. Almost on a monthly basis, we'll get some other update on some company that's done another test. Sometimes they crash.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're fine. But I think it's going to still take a little while, but it's not out of the realm possibility that within 10 years, we're going to actually see those types of vehicles on our streets, and that is going to change to some level what we should expect out there.
So in our next iteration of the long-term transportation plan, you would probably see that as a completely new section on its own.
I do. I think that that's another good example. We talked earlier when Paul was up here about other sections of the plan of what types of things will we get more in detailed discussion on. I know that that will be one of them.
Okay, thank you.
I was hoping we could get Randy to come up and answer
Yeah.
the questions that I had asked, and then.
Randy Haas.
I'd like to swear you in. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
We're looking at a fiscally constrained plan. We're looking at needs that outpace revenues. We're looking at desire for growing the city as well as taking care of the streets. We've got a lot going on here. What can we do to contain costs? What, from your experience with managing traffic operations, can be done to try, $11 million a mile to widen, why? Can you shed some light for us?
Randy Hoskins, Assistant City Engineer. Yeah, you've hit on a great point there. There are some ways that we can do things less expensively up front. You asked the question particularly building 4 lanes up front instead of 2. Yeah, if we had the money, that probably saves us, maybe 40% of the costs, as opposed to bringing a contractor out there twice to reconstruct it. Not to mention the impacts that has on the road users themselves while the road is being widened, those sorts of things. I think we've looked at what sorts of ways can we build our roads to last longer. And then some of the things that we're looking at right now, some of the technological sorts of advances that we can do. One of the things that this plan does include is ensuring that we have money to make those intersection improvements. Because if you think about it, usually when you're driving down the road, there's not a big problem most of the way until you get to the intersection. So if we can make those intersections operate more efficiently, then the whole road probably doesn't need to be widened quite as much if we can just take those clogged points and help those out. So looking at things like not only the intersection improvements, but also looking at some of the intelligent transportation type systems where we can either, goes back to the question about, I guess, how driverless cars will fit into this. If we can start doing some of these things now, we can really, I think, make a positive change down the road, and keep that traffic moving better than perhaps otherwise. So.
Councilwoman Lamb?
Thank you. Dave, thank you for coming forward today. I had a couple questions with regard to the comparison level of investment chart that you gave us. And I just wanted to follow up on something Councilman Camp asked you. Am I to understand that there's $33 million of what's represented in the roads budget is for the what's called on-street bicycle facilities?
Yeah, I think I misspoke earlier. It is mainly for the ongoing sidewalk maintenance program, which is $1 million per year starting in 2017.
Okay, so the roads budget has for maintaining and rehabbing, correct? And for new roads, correct?
Correct.
And then also having to fit into there is the sidewalk program.
Correct.
Which also includes this on-street bicycle facilities.
Yes.
Okay, and would that be what are we talking about there? Is that like the N Street bike path?
Actually, it's not really about the N Street protected bikeway. It's more about bike lanes that you might see like on South 11th Street that is more paint and signage. And the strategy there that's being discussed is when we are doing an improvement like a rehab project, if there is an opportunity and it makes sense, we would have a discussion about possibly putting bike lanes in with that project if it can fit and if it makes sense traffic-wise. Those are much lower cost numbers, and it's really a conceptual proposal in this plan. They're not identified projects. But to get back to protected bikeway, there is, and Councilman Camp had this question at a different point in time, but I want to address it. The downtown master plan does show a north-south protected bikeway in the future. That is part of this plan by reference and on maps as well. So that concept is there as well. But looking back at kind of what that level of investment would be, we don't have an answer to that yet. We wouldn't move forward with that project until we knew how we were going to fund something like that.
Okay, so the transit numbers that are here, this is StarTran.
Correct.
And the trails is for just our trail system,
Yes,
which are bike and pedestrian trails, correct?
correct.
But there's also money in the roads for that alternative transportation in forms of bike.
Yes, a very small amount of money would be, it wouldn't approach the $33 million for the sidewalk program. It wouldn't be that large.
Where would that be located?
That is built into those road programs for rehabilitation, and if and when we are widening something, we would take a look at when and if those types of facilities are needed or feasible.
Okay, but it would be in that part of the chart.
It would be in that part of the chart. Yep.
Okay, Councilman Christensen?
I'd like to come back and ask more questions about what Councilwoman Gaylor Baird was asking about, this $11 million per mile to widen a street. We've been operating, at least partially, under a complete streets program. What's the difference in cost between an $11 million a mile widening rehab of a street under the complete streets program and the way we used to do it? Do we know that number? Is that a way of reducing cost?
There are different ways to identify a project as being a complete streets project. Not all projects would have added features to it. That's one of our points of our program for that, because it might be a half a mile away, we have a trail, and we're dealing with some things that way. The actual number of a cost for a complete street versus a non-complete street, I think, quite honestly, the answer to that is that we don't really look at it that way. We look at it in the sense of when we build a street, we look at all the different factors that go into the design, and then with a complete streets program, we take a moment, pause, and say, okay, is there anything else that maybe should be considered as part of this design? And maybe it is included, maybe it is not. Very often, they're very minor improvements. It could be simply that there is a desire to make sure that there is a better continued sidewalk system that isn't there today. And so we're extending the sidewalk from point A to point B so that we can make sure that happens as part of a rehab project. That often is the limit of that type of improvement. We haven't done a lot of projects that say, hey, let's go in and put bike lanes in. That is yet to be seen as far as that cost is concerned.
Councilman Eskridge, and then Councilwoman Raybold.
Thank you. Okay, your financially constrained plan means doing more, at least doing the same with what we've got or without significant increases in resources. A year ago, I had the opportunity to meet with some of our public works staff because in travels to my hometown frequently, I observed their roads were it seemed to me to be a whole lot better than our roads were. And so, and fortunately, had great help in looking at that, and there were three main differences. The weather in North Carolina is a lot different than the weather in Nebraska. That's pretty obvious. The second thing was materials, and some of that had to do with difference in weather, but also some of it had to do with some, I'll say it, but some bad choices in terms of materials that were used that haven't held up. And so we're going back, replacing roads, repairing roads that actually should have held up better than what they have. And then the third thing, the big thing, is they've got state funding that we don't have. So there are significant differences, reasons why roads in Charlotte, North Carolina are better than they are, or appear to me to be better than they are in Lincoln, Nebraska. In our budget time, I don't like the wheel tax. I don't like I think there's some inequalities with it. You're paying the same amount of money whether you're driving a $100,000 fancy Italian sports car or $250 Weird Wally special. Doesn't matter. And those inefficiencies really concern me. Considered introducing something to reduce the wheel tax, but
what I discovered was you reduce the wheel tax and you reduce it a little bit. It doesn't help those people a whole lot, and it hurts the city in terms of our funding for roads project significantly. So here comes the question. This proposal looks at adding to the wheel tax over 5-year periods. What would that additional $5 add to revenue to be able to do more?
And I'll take the opportunity to explain a little bit about that assumption in the plan as well. We have established an assumption for an increase in the wheel tax beginning in 2021 and every 5 years after that, and that is mainly based on the historical trend since the wheel tax has been in place, that about every 5 years that $5 increment does increase. And that is the way that LRTPs and transportation plans are put together. You look at historical trends in revenues and you project that out to whatever the horizon year is, and then that establishes your funding base. Be very clear about that. That does not mean that the plan says it and therefore it shall be.
Right.
There is a separate process to increase that. That would be a point in time. We'd have to have that discussion.
Right.
Every time that would happen, we'd have to do that.
Correct.
And we would adjust the plan accordingly if things either did or did not happen related to that and any other revenue source. A $5 increase in the wheel tax, the last I checked, was in the range of about $1.1 million per year for revenue.
Okay.
It might be slightly higher than that now. So if you compound that every single year, and you compound that if there's going to be additional increases in the wheel tax every 5 years, it does add up to a chunk of money that is available for the roads program.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Councilwoman Raybold?
I don't want to minimize the fiscal constraints that we're currently experiencing and going forward. Sounds like we're going to continue to experience. It sort of feels like Groundhog Day. Like, haven't we been here before talking about roads dollars? And I'm looking right at Larry Hudkins, and how many conversations have we had about trying to find revenue sources to fund the ever-increasing demands to repair roads, increase roads? I mean, I think we've looked at impact fees, trying to figure out how to make impact fees fund our future roads as our city grows, the new roads out around the periphery. And then that darn wheel tax. Nobody likes the wheel tax because it's just out there, and it just is very frustrating. We've used the B word, a bond, street and road improvement bond, and that was probably more universally disliked than the wheel tax. So I guess the frustration is we're always going to be scrambling to find funds to make sure that we live up to our commitment about keeping our infrastructure up to where it needs to be, to continue to attract jobs and people and fuel that economic engine that we need to keep fueling. So I guess, I don't know, I have a question, but I just want perhaps can you put this drawing back up on the Elmo? Because as everyone's talking about, I think we're shifting funds away from the roads, and I think we're giving them to StarTran. I guess I'm looking at it, and the numbers don't look like that to me. It shows that in 2011 on roads we spent 79.1%, and then it looks like the investment that is being talked about in the LRTP is a little bit of an increase of about 8%. Not a lot, probably not near enough to keep up with the pace of the demand of roads. And Commissioner Avery was making a funny comment before. He said, well, people were complaining about all the orange cones in the road, about all the construction that was going on. And it sounds like from this other one, it looks like we just keep increasing road construction about 58%. And so, you're going to get complaints about whether you do the right thing or the wrong thing or too much construction. But then if you look at transit, despite the fact that the City Council supported increasing funding for StarTran, because we saw it as a means of economic growth and development, so employers would be able to have employees who could come to and work and use that form of transportation because they need more employees, and it would be a means of facilitating their transport. But it looks like on the transit, instead of, it's been shrunk from 19.4% in 2011 to to 18.6% in 2016. So it's amazing that we are doing more with less. And just one observation from riding the bus, it seems like there are more millennials. And I know that when I put my bike on the rack, I was worried that, you know, there's only 2 spaces for a bike. And I think perhaps we need to add that to handle the millennials. But the most important thing about the trails is, that number is 1.5, it's just flat. And I think a better way of looking at all of this is that for every $10 of transportation funding out there, $8 is spent on roads. Plain and simple, $8 is spent on roads. And then looking at StarTran, only about $1.85 is spent on StarTran. And then if you look at the trails, 15 cents, that's 15 cents is spent on trails. And I know that many of us heard that Lonely Planet recognized the city of Lincoln as one of the 3rd most interesting cities in the United States to come and visit. And they cited, of course, all the great developments going on in the Haymarket, but they specifically singled out the, 144 miles of trails in our city that make us so unique. Let me tell you, Omaha envies us. And a lot of other municipalities wish they had as many trails that we have. I think millennials are going to demand more trails, like Bill was suggesting, and I think they're going to be demanding better routes on StarTran, longer hours than what we're currently pushing for. So I guess I didn't have a commentary, but I wanted you to show that the numbers are a little bit different. We are shifting funds to the roads. Looks like we're shifting them away from transit, and trails are just flat.
Commissioner Wilton?
To follow up on Jane's comment or questions, and again, being a county commissioner, I'm not well-versed on public transit, but you mentioned earlier that the annual inflation cost for roads was 5%. Do you have any estimate as what the annual increase in cost of public transit is? I know that your biggest cost is labor, and some of the equipment probably is getting more expensive, but can you kind of talk, because I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, basically, we are being consistent with the 5% increase. In the plan, we actually have a lower rate of cost increase attributed to the Trails program, and that's based on the Trail program's actual experience with projects. That's at 3%. But for pretty much everything else, we have the 5% based on experience. And you're right. I mean, the biggest cost is on personnel when it comes to the transit service itself. But there's other costs in there, such as the fleet turnover. Every number of years, we have another certain amount of the buses get purchased again to replace a 12 to 14 or 15-year-old vehicle that we've stretched the life out of. So that's kind of what is assumed in the plan.
What is that number? Is it 3%, 2%?
I believe on that one we've kept it steady with the 5%.
5% as well.
Yeah. And again, so for inflation in general, we all hope that it's not that high, but that has been, you could put it away. It's a conservative way of doing this plan so that we're not caught short as we start to really implement some things.
Okay, thank you. I just was made aware that we do have a city council meeting coming up at 3 o'clock, and so we are going to have to save time for public comment. And so I think that I will cease now with the meeting, with questions from the combined boards, and go to public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. So anybody testifying in favor of this?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. Well, council members, you've seen a lot of me over the past year and a half, and commissioners, not so much. So, council members, I'm going to tell you some of the same things that I've told you for a long time, but this will be new for the commissioners.
Schmeling, could you give your name and address too, please?
I will.
Thank you.
My name is Richard Schmeling, and I'm at 4612 Van Dorn Street, Lincoln, Nebraska 68506. I can't talk as fast as the planning director, or I'd probably be able to get all this in 5 minutes, but I'll try to talk as fast as I can. Just briefly, some background. Grew up in Nebraska. Came here to Lincoln, attended the University of Nebraska. I have a major in history, minors in political science and economics. When I was taking political science courses, we had a crusty old professor from New England by the name of Bruce Winter, who was one of my instructors. Trent, in answer to your question about the millennials, I saw a survey recently. In the 1970s, 94% of the millennials, the first thing they wanted and got was a car. For the millennials now, that figure is down to about 73%. I can't tell you because I'm not sure even Mr. Davis can tell how old people are. We kind of count numbers of people getting on and off the bus, and it would be very hard to talk about age. But I ride the buses almost exclusively for my transportation. I'm seeing a lot of the millennials on the buses. And I don't think that's going to change. You know, sure, those individuals may buy a house at some point in time and may change things, but you know, if they're pretty pleased with public transit, they'll probably continue to use public transit. And you know, you say the millennials grow and mature and change. I don't know. I see a lot of old hippies around with white hair still in the ponytail, and their lifestyle hasn't changed all that much. I've experienced transportation all over the world. I've ridden the bullet trains in Tokyo. I've ridden the subway in Montreal. I've ridden New York public transit. I've been Chicago transit, New Orleans, you name it. I'm a lifelong student of transportation. So I have some thoughts I'd like to share with you. And one of the thoughts is basically this. We need to realize what other cities have realized years ago, and that is you cannot pave your way out of congestion. Now, we have a radio commentator who heads up a business group, and he's been putting out this blarney that we ought to shift spending from transit and trails to streets. He's 50 years behind in his transportation doctrine. The trend all over the United States and all over the world is to shift away from individual cars and go to public transit. And Lincoln needs to be doing that. We need more investment in StarTran and trails and so forth, not less. Trent Feller's talked about the autonomous cars. Trent, I've been following that. It's real interesting. I'll tell you a little story. Tesla tested a car, and what they did was they put a goose out along the side of the road, and then a lady in a motorized wheelchair with a broom, and then they had the Tesla car come along. They set the goose out in the road, the lady in the motorized wheelchair chasing the goose with her broom, and then the Tesla car sort of tried to figure out what to do with this. And what happened, yes?
Okay, your time is up, sir.
My time is up.
Yeah.
Can I finish my story?
Finish your statement, finish your statement.
I'll do it very quickly. What happened was the goose ran around in a circle, the lady was chasing it, and the Tesla car started following them around a circle. The goose ran off the road, the lady ran off the road, the Tesla ran off the road.
Thank you.
I think we're at least 20 years, if not more, from perfecting that technology.
Okay, thank you for your time.
I will wish you all, since I bothered to come here and testify, I want to wish you all Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. The best Christmas present you could give me is to approve this plan the way it's written and not carve money out of transit and give it to streets.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and I must say that as chair, I do have the discretion to reduce the time. And because we do have a 3 o'clock meeting coming up, I'm going to reduce it from 5 down to 3 minutes. Okay, ma'am, sir, whichever there.
Do you solemnly swear from the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. My name is Don Nelson. I'm a 48-year resident of Lincoln, Nebraska, with a 7.5-year alienation in Wyoming. I've served on a lot of committees, task forces over the years, been very involved in local and state government. And I'm just here to speak for maybe 1 minute on one issue: fairness. Those of us who don't have a dog in the hunt with public transit, but go to other communities around the world and see how muscular and vigorous a transit system is and should be for a community our size, have been diligently working. And we thank you for your support in funding the studies, the 2-year-long study for the public transit system. And it has a wealth of data in there. We just barely into our first 30 days of the new configuration. For 32 years, the Southwood bus rumbled by our home in Southwood, virtually empty. And I've been struggling for years trying to get a shift to where we run those buses on arterials, where people will learn how to go from A to B. I pledge to you that I'm going to redouble my effort, even though I'm not a transit rider and I'm speaking on behalf of people who need it, to work with the business community and the low and moderate income families to try to get them to adapt to this new system that you have generously funded. We look forward to fine-tuning it and getting it even more muscular and vigorous. We need to start looking at our transit system as an economic development tool to move our community members from home to job, the way our parents did for 50 years. All of us grew up with one-car families. But the 3 of us that didn't have access to the vehicle, or 4 of us or 5 of us, rode the buses. If a poor family in Lincoln, Nebraska can abandon their private vehicle, they can save anywhere from $5,000 to $17,000. And it will go a long way in collapsing the troublesome poverty bridge that's growing in our community. That's what we ought to be concerned about. I will answer Councilman Christian's question about suburbs briefly by saying, for 100 years in Lincoln, Nebraska, we had suburbs, but they were separately incorporated municipalities. The legislature and the previous city council decided 80 years ago to abolish that system.
Okay, and thank you.
I'm done.
Okay.
Thank you
for
very
your
much.
time.
And thank you for your support of the streets. I would take issue. I think they're in better shape than I've ever seen in 50 years. And I use them every day.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do. My name is Esther Hernandez, and I live at 1000 O Street. And I just want to inform you that I use a handy van. I've used it for the past 2 years and got recertified again for 2020. So I just want to let you know, in our residence of 54 people who live there, about 6 of us rely on the handy van. And I want to thank you for letting me speak. Thank you.
Okay.
Do I sign? I don't have to sign.
Yes, you do.
Where?
Someone take the sign-in sheet.
Oh, right.
Where's the sign-in sheet?
There is no sign.
There's no sign-in sheet.
There's no sign-in sheet?
No.
There was
There
one.
was.
There was.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. Danae Kalkowski, this afternoon appearing on behalf of several developers. I just want to come and speak this afternoon in support of the comprehensive plan, and particularly the updates that are being shown to the growth tiers and to the land use plan, particularly those areas in the east and in the southwest where we're moving some areas from priority Tier 1, Priority C to Tier 1, Priority B. I think these changes recognize that we need some additional areas available for continued multi-directional growth for our city. This will continue to provide new areas for diversity of housing choices.
I know the city, from our practice, appears to be continued and poised on continued growth. And so we've seen the interest and the need for additional areas for this growth to occur. And I think the comp plan does a really good job of showing some of these potential areas and allowing us to keep our growth in a multi-directional direction. I would be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. My name's Robert Kozelka. I live at 1935 A Street, which I've owned and paid taxes on for more than 40 years. 40 years ago, when I returned to Lincoln after a brief hiatus to other parts of the country and realized the best place in the world was to come back to Lincoln, I was the chair of a subcommittee of the Mayor's Bicycle Safety Committee. And that subcommittee laid out a plan for the city of Lincoln to have bike routes on abandoned railroad plants and to provide alternate ways on streets of traveling. We then got that into a comprehensive plan, thanks to the great planning director, Doug Brogdon. We then worked to have the city take over the most decrepit bus system in the world to create what is now StarTran. All of this was planning, and all of this was implementation. I'm here to ask you to support what you have before you because it represents a continuation of planning and implementation. Don't back down. Things are going to change. No one rode bicycles as transportation when I first came back to Lincoln, or very few did. Thousands do now, and thousands more will in the future. If anything, you should take money away from roads, put it into trails, put it into public transportation. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Being almost 5 till, I would ask that we cut public comment short and just let everyone know, and I think I've discussed this with just about everyone, that I feel the need for more time before we make a vote, the city council, and so I'll be moving for that for a week delay, which I've spoken to Mr. Carey about and to several of the members of the commissioners.
Okay. It's been moved that we delay this for further discussion. Delay a vote for further discussion. Is there a second?
We've got 7 more minutes.
Oh. Okay, well.
Let's hear
Do you-
more testimony.
More testimony then?
Yeah,
Okay.
and correct me if I'm wrong, sorry to barge right in here, but can our city council meeting start like 10 minutes late?
No.
No.
Start at 3.
Yeah.
And we need time to reset between meetings.
Okay.
Okay. So with that in mind? Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we delay any action on this for 1 week in order to study this further. Is there any discussion?
I guess just a question for the people that have sat here for nearly 2 hours expecting the opportunity to have public comment. Will they have the opportunity, out of respect for the people that have sat here for nearly 2 hours expecting the opportunity for public comment, will they have an opportunity then at a different point in time?
I guess if the motion included the desire to keep the public hearing open, although, I mean,
Won't be a
I
joint
don't-
meeting.
yeah.
How many more we're planning? I mean, is it
1, 2.
We could probably get it in.
Okay, we could probably get that in then.
Yeah.
3.
Okay. So we
Come
have
on
a
down.
motion and a second, but we can delay it for further testimony.
Yes,
Okay.
do it.
Thank you.
Okay,
in 3 months?
yeah, quickly.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time. Yes,
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thanks.
Thank you. A lot of elected officials here today giving your time, and thank you for serving our city and our county. I know when all of you ran for office that there were a lot of promises made, but there were no promises made that you would approve a plan that includes a wheel tax increase every 5 years for the next 20 years. When all of you ran for office, there were no promises made that we would have more street congestion. This plan takes us from 1.5% street congestion today, 1.5 to 11% after it takes complete effect. It takes away capacity and reduces the likelihood that streets across the city will be widened. That includes 84th Street, O Street, and Highway 2. I know that when all of you ran for office, none of you promised that we would have roads that are in poorer condition at the end of this plan than when you took office. And yet, the City Council has been told, you were told last week, that our roads will be in poorer condition if this plan is adopted. At the mayor's press conference, he said that we're spending on streets has increased by 58%. I would say it should be increased by 58%. Since he has taken office, the wheel tax has gone up 37%. That's more money for roads. We have also had our population increase 3,000 people a year. So not only is the wheel tax more, but we're taxing more people. The brand new Build Nebraska Act money is flowing into the city now. The fuel taxes have been increased, and that money's flowing into Lincoln, not to mention the amount of money we have for impact fees. So I would suggest we ought to be spending more. We suggest asking staff to go back to the drawing board. The first place for staff to address is the amount of road dollars that are going to sidewalks, trails, bikeways, and bike facilities. That's road dollars. And the amount is millions of dollars of wheel tax and highway allocation funds that are going for trails, bikeways, bicycle facilities, and sidewalks. I'll give you a list so you can reference them in our CIP. And then finally, on millennials, the city council members met with the StarTran consultants, the folks doing a study from the university, about 4 weeks ago. Yacht was hired at the university. Yacht came and appeared before the city council and said, and I quote, "Not many millennials are riding StarTran." It's on tape, you can go back and watch it. She said that the number one issue in Lincoln is that we like our cars. So we just feel we have to refocus on streets. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, and the final person to come forward?
Got about 2 minutes.
Do you solemnly swear affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir. Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs of Lincoln Government. First thing I'd like to say is I don't appreciate having my time or anybody's time cut short for a public hearing when it states that we are given 5 minutes in the written out there. Okay. When we looked at this, we see it as heavy on conclusions, but short on specifics. If you have data that comes to conclusions, I'd like to see it. I would like for the public to be able to see that. Specifically, you had 824 responses. That's hardly a large majority of the people in this city. 6.5% of the population does not own cars. That means 93.5% do own cars. And yet you want to raise the wheel tax, which Andy Stebbing has said is the highest in the nation. He has other counties coming here to use our way of managing that. Okay, how many people are riding bikes for the 6 months that we have chilly weather? How many people over 65 are riding bikes? We have an obesity problem in Lincoln, and so that must mean they're not getting much exercise on bikes. The truth is that this country was founded on individuality. And horses as a mean of transportation, carriages, et cetera. And it's a status symbol for a 16-year-old to have a car or to get a license to have a car. You're not going to change human nature by making bike trails. I think we need to have consideration for the transportation system, but not make it the zenith for our tax dollars. The election has come forth with ideas that are not of the previous administration. The focus is on infrastructure and giving money for that, not for bike trails and so forth. And I think that you are out of sync if you approve this plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. And we do have a motion and a second on the floor. And so is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Do we have to vote by county? and
Oh,
by
yes, I'm
city?
sorry. Yes, we do have to vote. County board action.
Well, I have the question. So was it addressed that we're going to keep it open for public hearing one more week? So that means the city council would vote on Monday, December 19th, but the county board would vote then on Tuesday,
Yes.
the 20th.
Yeah, and the motion was not to keep open the discussion at this point, as we heard all the people that were here to speak.
But out of fairness for any individual that would like to speak, I mean, we're going to be able to have the opportunity to continue this conversation tomorrow, or for us next
Right.
Tuesday. So the
Right.
county board does have the opportunity to have additional public hearing comments.
Sure, why not?
Let's vote. Okay.
Well, wait, are you saying county board intends to carry forward public hearing testimony at your December 20th meeting?
It would have to be at the December 20th meeting because tomorrow's meeting, the agenda is already out.
But
So it'd have to be on the 20th.
But even tomorrow during a public comment period, any individual would have an opportunity
Yes.
to provide public comment with regards to
Yeah, it would not be
the
on the.
comprehensive plan
Yeah.
and the LRTP.
We've got a meeting we got to start.
Yeah, we
Okay,
do.
and then are we going to vote as the city council after the county board
We can take
votes?
that later.
Or
We can vote to delay right now.
We're voting to delay.
to delay.
With public hearing on the city council for next Monday?
Separate votes.
Separate.
Let's just vote and do it.
Yeah, okay. So, yes, so it is to delay, and so if the county board then, will you please call the roll for the county board?
Hudkins,
Yes.
Avery,
Yes.
Wilchin,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Okay, for city council, Camp,
Yes.
I'm sorry, clarify, it is a delay.
this is just a delay, no public hearing.
Public hearing. You can add a public hearing later if you'd like, Jane.
No, she can't.
She
We
can't?
have to advertise it on the agenda
For next Monday.
for next Monday. If you want to add public hearing, you need to include it in your motion now.
That's what I thought. So I,
What was in the motion?
The motion is to delay action for
to
1
delay
week.
action.
with
For 1
no
week.
public hearing.
No public
No
hearing.
public-
But wait, is there a friendly amendment to my colleagues who've introduced it to continue the public comment for
I
1
would
week?
accept a friendly amendment to
Thank you.
continue
I'll second
public
that.
hearing.
So, and John will second it. So the motion before us, Teresa, would you mind clarifying again?
Is to delay public hearing and action for 1 week then.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Camp,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Eskridge.
Yes.
Fellers,
Yes.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Raybold.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
I move
Okay.
adjournment.
Second?
Moved and seconded that we adjourn, please call the roll.
Wilchin, Shore,
Yes.
Hudkins, Avery,
Yes.
Amundson.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Camp,
Yes.
Christensen,
Yes.
Eskridge.
Yes.
Fellers.
Yes.
Gaylor Baird,
Yes.
Lamb,
Yes.
Raybold.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
We are adjourned. We'll be right back.